we're going to talk about actual doctrines of demons being taught in the government school system. And I know that sounds like a tall order. He's just being hyperbolic. No, I'm not. There are actual doctrines of demons being taught to children at every level, and it has been going on from the very beginning of the government takeover of the so-called education system. And I can prove it. I will give you several examples today. There are many, many more, but I will show you that along the path of having the government take over the education system and what we're seeing today, there are actual doctrines of demons in the most literal sense possible. And I may just cancel this update just in case it takes a long time. But we'll do a little bit of a history lesson today. A lot of people don't realize that the government didn't used to educate children. It's actually a new phenomenon that the government has taken over the education of children. Historically speaking, that's been a parental responsibility, and if the parents wanted any help with the raising and the educating of their children, they would go to their family, to extended family, they would go to the church, they would go to other people in the community, or they'd go to a private provider, a tutor, something like that. But this whole idea that the government should be in charge of educating children is really a new phenomenon. And the guy who came up with the idea that the government ought to be educating children was talking to spirits, by his own admission. So it all starts with a guy who was communicating with demons. And he admits that that's where he was getting a lot of his ideas from. He claims to have been using a Ouija board. And we'll come back to him, but let me see if we finally... All right, I think we finally got it. So let me put the slideshow up from the beginning. Alrighty. And I'll start with this. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, we read, the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith by devoting themselves to... PowerPoint crashed. Sorry. Doctrines of demons is what the Scripture teaches. And I think a lot of people just read right over that, gloss right over that, and well, that probably doesn't apply to us. Right? We certainly don't believe any doctrines of demons, so we're good. But the reality is... this is now ubiquitous. So, we'll just do it without the update, and hopefully that works. But yeah, so deceitful spirits and the teachings of demons or doctrines of demons. And Jesus actually gives us a pretty simple formula to figure out what side things fall on. Either you're with me or you're against me. Amen. Okay? It's pretty simple. And as we go through this, I think you'll see very clearly what side the people who built and operate this system are on. Now in Luke chapter 6, in verse 40, Jesus tells us something that we really didn't need Jesus to tell us. It's kind of obvious. Students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will become like the teacher. Duh, right? Wow, really? Kids are going to end up like whoever teaches them? Yeah, they will. Your average American child today spends about 18,000 hours with the government in a school. Okay. A really highly involved parent might spend 4,000 to 5,000 hours with their child until they reach adulthood. So who's the child going to be more like? The government or the parents? Well, for most people, it's actually pretty simple. Now, I'm not implying here that Jesus can't save people who've been brainwashed. He saved me. Imagine that. So it is possible. But Jesus also gave us clear instructions here on what we are to do. And then we act surprised when we see the data about young people today. And I'm not even young anymore. I'm a millennial, the idiots, right? 70% of us are going to vote for socialists, is what the polling data shows. These are scientific polls. Less than half of us even identify as Christian anymore. And if you actually drill down into that, 6% of millennials have a biblical worldview. In other words, they see the world through a biblical lens. So yeah, about 48% of millennials identify as Christian. Only 6% have a biblical worldview. Among Gen Z, it's only 4%. And as you can see, the numbers are declining. I wonder why. Maybe because the government that's educating 80+% of them murders babies with tax money? Maybe. I don't know. So as you guys know, they're working on a new world order, and
these aren't, we always talk about these children. They're not someone else's children. They're our children.
Yeah, actually, no, they're not, Biden. Stop sniffing the kids. They're not yours, right? But what they're doing here is they're waging war on God, on truth, on reality, on even biology now. I mean, if you had told people 10 years ago there'd be infinite genders, they would have laughed at you, maybe called the guys with the little white coats to send you to a rubber room. But today, it's like, what? You don't believe there's infinite genders? You're some kind of hate group. Right? Imagine that. So there's a very, very simple formula here. Right? If you want to understand what they're teaching your kids, what the goals are, you just take everything the Bible teaches, flip it exactly upside down on every issue every time, and you'll find out where they're at. Right? God said, "Thou shalt not steal." They said, "Well, resources aren't equitably distributed, so we're going to have to steal them." God said, "Don't murder." I said, "Well, is that really a person? It's just a clump of cells." Right? And over again, we see this formula at work. Now, the UN admits that they are brainwashing your kids and that this is central to their whole plan. Right? They have Agenda 21. This was adopted in 1992.
The Convention on the importance of economic instruments and free markets were included in this mammoth Agenda 21 document.
So it's a real thing, and every government in the world has agreed to it. Both parties, or both wings of the Uniparty, fully agree. Here's the longtime leader of the Communist Party in Congress, Nancy Pelosi.
The Earth Summit Environmental Leadership Act, as this is known, presents us with an opportunity to follow up on the important work of the Earth Summit to develop its blueprint, Agenda 21.
And she goes on, she loves it, right? So Agenda 21, for those of you not familiar, according to the UN, is an array of actions intended to be implemented by every person on Earth. And it's going to require, they say, a profound reorientation of all human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. That's a tall order. And they got a bunch of bitter clingers to deal with. What are we going to do with the bitter clingers? Well, they're going to ignore us and they're going to brainwash our kids. That's not my opinion. That's what they say right in the text of Agenda 21. If you read it, go to chapter 36. Education is critical for promoting this ideology from hell called sustainable development. It's indispensable, they said, for changing people's attitudes. This is right in the text of the international agreement. They said it is critical for giving children the right values, ethics, attitudes, skills, and behaviors. And they said it needs to include spiritual development as well. What do they mean by spiritual development? We'll come back to that. Okay? They're very open about what they're doing. In the interest of time, we're going to have to skip a lot. But here's a UN book. It's called Agenda 21 for Children, Rescue Mission, Planet Earth. You see the Hindu deities are very upset about all these babies being delivered by the storks. And on the page next to it, you read the problem. It turns out the earth groans every time it registers another birth. All right, what did God say? What was the very first command he gave to people? Be fruitful and multiply. So what do they teach our kids? Oh, Mother Earth is groaning every time you have one of those carbon dioxide emitting things. Okay? So, Agenda 2030, we talked about it a little moment ago. They have 17 sustainable development goals. Goal number 4 is make sure that by 2030, all learners are so brainwashed, they won't just passively submit to this ideology, they will promote it, it says. Okay, that's how brainwash. And then it gives you some specifics. You got to brainwash the kids on human rights, which means the opposite of what Americans think of as rights, right? The government gives you human rights. They can be revoked at will at any time. But they need to teach kids global citizenship, which is exactly what it sounds like, right? You'd be a citizen of the UN. Marxism is the best way to fight poverty, according to the UN's Agenda 2030 board game for children. We're not going to look at the history of education today because other speakers are going to teach you about this, but American education historically, before the government took it over, was completely and totally dedicated to a biblical understanding of reality. History, science, reading, every single subject was taught through a biblical lens. And that led to the creation of the greatest, freest, most prosperous nation in the history of the world. Now that is all being systematically dismantled. Here's how they used to learn their letters. Right, this is A, in Adam's fall, we sinned all. Right? So while you learn your letters, you learn your theology. B, thy life to mend, this book attend, talking about the Bible. All right, so you learn your letters, you learn your theology. Everything is inseparable from this. They couldn't believe, when Alexis de Tocqueville came here from France, he could not believe how well educated Americans were. He said it's extremely rare to find a man imperfectly acquainted with the doctrines and evidences of his religion, the history of his country, the leading features of its constitution. A man wholly ignorant of them is a sort of phenomenon. Right? And today it's exactly the opposite. You find somebody who's acquainted with these things, you say, oh, you must be homeschooled. Yes. And then along comes this guy. Right? We were the most educated people in the world. We had almost 100% literacy across most of our big cities. Even in the South, 90+% literacy, almost universal literacy among women by the early 1800s. And then Robert Owen came along. And Robert Owen was a communist before communism was a thing. He came along even before Karl Marx did. And he had these ideas about how society should be run. And he claimed to be fighting the great trinity of evil. The great trinity of evil was marriage and family, private property, and religion. In particular, Christianity. That was the great trinity of evil that we had to fight. And he determined that he actually set up a communist commune in Indiana called New Harmony, and it failed after less than 2 years because communism is ridiculous and doesn't work. But he concluded that the problem wasn't with the communism. The problem was that these children had been raised in a thoroughly Christian society. Their parents were probably Christian, and they just couldn't get over their hang-ups about marriage and family and private property. God said, "Thou shalt not steal." They just couldn't stop being bitter clingers. So he determined that the way forward was to have the government take over education. He wrote a bunch of essays on this, including in 1813, A New View of Society, Essays on the Formation of Human Character. And he said, he wrote about this in his autobiography. He said the Prussian dictator's ambassador in London, his name was Baron Jacobi, got a hold of these essays. And he said he so much approved of these ideas about the government taking over education that he ordered his interior minister to set up the first ever system of so-called education of the state, by the state, and for the state. This was in Prussia. He wanted obedient citizens. He had just lost a war with Napoleon. He figured, hey, maybe if I can train these people to obey me, maybe we won't lose the next war. So going back to Robert Owen, here in the United States, he set up a secret society. And we know about the secret society because one of the men involved, his name was Orestes Brownson, he became a Catholic, and he repented of his involvement in this wicked scheme. He actually blew the whistle. And he wrote a book about it. And he said the secret society was modeled on the Carbonari, this nasty, vile group of conspirators in Italy. And he said their goals were to shift public opinion in favor of having the government take over education and to get men elected to legislatures who would support the idea of the government taking control of education. Really interesting stuff in his book. If we had more time, I would go through it with you. But he said the great object, this is Orestes Brownson again, the whistleblower, the great object of this plan to have the government take over education was to get rid of Christianity, which back then probably sounded quite ludicrous, right? You're going to unbrainwash 99% of Americans? Yeah, good luck with that. Right? And they knew it wouldn't be a quick process. They knew it would be slow and painful. But they had this plan, he says. The plan was not to make open attacks on religion. I mean, then people might figure out what we're doing. The plan was to create a state, and we said national system of education in which nothing would be taught except such knowledge as is verifiable by the senses, and in which parents would be compelled by law to send their children. Which at the time was actually a very radical proposal. When they first did this in Massachusetts in the mid-1800s, they had to call out the militia to force parents to hand over their children to the government, right? This was not a popular idea. And then just a few months before he died, Robert Owen gave us a great revelation. He convened the Congress of the Advanced Minds of the World, and he included himself among that number. He thought he was very advanced, far more so than us troglodytes clinging to our religion. And he admitted in his talk, I have the whole thing, it's crazy. He admitted that he was talking to spirits. He said they were going to bring about this great change, the wonder of all nations and people. It'll be effected through the medium of the, to many, strange and yet little understood spiritual manifestations. It's a fascinating talk he gave. He said there are spirits now around and about us, spirits through the aid of superior intelligence and power have been purified and perfected, and they're deeply interested in forming and carrying forward certain various measures in different parts of the world to bring this great and glorious change for humanity. So he was talking to spirits, and the spirits were giving him ideas about how we could bring about these great and glorious changes that would enlighten all mankind. One of the key elements of this plan was to have the government educate children. Which again, we all take that for granted. Like, of course the government's going to educate kids. That was not how people saw this back in the 1800s when these ideas were coming along. I encourage you to read this speech sometime because he talks about how he's communicating with the spirits. He says he's using Ouija boards. He said they're tapping on walls and furniture so that he can discern the messages. And he's quite sure that they're dead people because some of them he knew when they were alive and they talk in the same way and they believe the same things. So he's quite sure that they're the same dead people that he knew when they were alive. They're just much smarter now. Now, what does our Bible say about this? Leviticus chapter 19 says, do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Necromancers are people who talk to allegedly dead people. Do not seek them out and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Oh, that's a big no-no, right? Don't talk to dead people. Don't go looking for necromancers to talk to dead people for you. It says a man or a woman who's a medium or a necromancer shall surely be put to death. That's how serious God was about this. It says they shall be stoned with stones, their blood shall be upon them. It says there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, right? So people who sacrifice their children to demons are in the same category as people who claim to be communicating with the dead. Okay? People who sacrifice their children to demons, or anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or intercepts omens, or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer, or one who inquires of the dead. Whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. What does that make Robert Owen? An abomination to the Lord, right? Should Christians have been taking ideas from a guy who said he was talking to dead people? Of course not, right? And yet this man set in motion a train that culminated in virtually every child in the United States having their education at the very least impacted, if not entirely controlled, by the government. So, the system took root in Prussia. Then it was re-imported into the United States by Horace Mann. I don't know that he was talking to demons, although it wouldn't surprise me. But I do know that he wanted to get the Bible out of the schools, which at the time was seen as like one of the most ridiculous ideas in the world. How could you take the main textbook out of the school? Like, what would people learn then, right? And of course, he didn't come out directly and do a full frontal attack on the Bible. He didn't admit very loudly that he rejected the Bible, although he did. His excuse was, we don't want people arguing over doctrine. We don't want the Presbyterians arguing with the Anglicans, arguing with the Congregationalists, arguing with the Baptists or whatever about whose doctrine of predestination is correct. And so why don't we just let the churches handle that, and the parents handle that, and the schools will handle the other stuff. Exactly what Robert Owen wanted, right? Now, he wanted to equalize all men. And he said something really interesting in one of his many essays. He said, we who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause. Did any of you agree to give your children up as hostages to their cause? No, I don't think many people did, right? And again, these parents, for the most part, were not surrendering their children voluntarily. As I mentioned, when the state of Massachusetts became the first state to compel parents to hand their children over to the government for education, they had to call out the militia to force the issue because parents said, no, we're not giving you our kids, thank you very much. So Horace Mann studied the Prussian system, implemented that system in Massachusetts, and then went around the country like a traveling evangelist, preaching the good news of salvation by government education. Okay? You don't need Jesus, you need government schools. You need more social programs. He actually claimed, quite ridiculously, that we'd get rid of 90% of the crime if we could just have the government educate children. And obviously that worked real well. If you guys have been to Baltimore or Chicago or Detroit or Miami or any other of our cities, you know that they got rid of 90% of the crime, right? By their fruit ye shall know them, right? It has been an utter and total disaster. So now we get to John Dewey. John Dewey took over this system of government-run so-called education that Horace Mann and friends laid down. And he, too, was a very religious man, just not in the sense that we might recognize. He actually invented a new religion. Him and his little buddies got together, a lot of them from right here in Massachusetts. It was called the Humanist Manifesto. This was their religious document, and they thought they were so clever inventing a new religion. The first tenet of their new false religion was, we religious humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Okay? If you go to Genesis 1:1, what does God say? In the beginning, God created. So obviously, John Dewey's religion and the Bible are not compatible. And you know what? It's a free country. You can believe any kind of dumb thing you want. Even something as dumb as nothing exploded and created everything. It's a free country. You can believe whatever you want. But you can't brainwash my kids with my tax money to believe your false religion from hell. But that's exactly what they set out to do. One of his buddies, C.F. Potter, one of the co-signers of this religious abomination, wrote a book, Humanism, A New Religion. And he said education is going to be the most powerful ally of humanism. Every public school will be a school of humanism. What is your theistic Sunday school going to do, teaching only a fraction of the children one time a week for an hour to stem the tide of 5 days of humanistic teachings? And of course, it was a rhetorical question. The answer was essentially nothing, right? We laugh at your Sunday school. Your Sunday school will do nothing. We've got them for 5 days a week. Okay? And they still brag about this. Their silly magazine, The Humanist, 1983, said the classroom is the arena of conflict between the rotting corpse of Christianity and this new faith of humanism. Right? That's them speaking, not me. Now, they thought they were creating a new religion, but if you stop and think about it, right, there is no real God, and so I'm God, you're God. There is no real God to tell us what's right and wrong, so I'll decide what's right and wrong, you decide what's right and wrong. That's actually not a new religion, is it? It's the very same lie that Satan told in Genesis chapter 3. God knows that when you eat that fruit, ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Right? So we've come full circle. More doctrines of demons. Now, even without the whole fact that this is literally a lie from Satan, you can't actually believe in John Dewey's false religion and in the principles that our country is founded on. Right? Our founding fathers said it was a self-evident truth that God created us equally, that God endowed us with certain unalienable rights, and that these include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, if there is no God, how could that non-existent God give you rights? It's self-evidently ludicrous. So you cannot believe John Dewey's religion and also at the same time believe in the principles that America is literally founded upon. Okay. Now, as crazy as this sounds, this false religion from the pit of hell was actually established under the guise of preventing Congress from establishing a religion. Let me explain how. 1962, it's a true story. 1962, there was a prayer in the state of New York. It was a very simple prayer. It was developed by a Catholic priest, a Jewish rabbi, and a Protestant minister. Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, and our teachers, and our country. Amen. Oh, how controversial and divisive, right? Oh, no. Cry me a river. So this went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in its infinite wisdom, in the case Engel versus Vitale, said, nope, can't say that prayer. That's Congress establishing a religion. I bet the kids in here know this. Is the state of New York Congress? It's not a trick question. No, the state of New York is not Congress. Okay. When the First Amendment was written, a lot of our states actually had established churches. Does anybody think the First Amendment was intended to prevent the state of New York from having children say a prayer? No, of course not, right? Of course not. But that's how brainwashed and dumbed down we had become after 60, 70 years of government so-called education. So 1963, a school district in Pennsylvania, the Abington School District, they were having a Bible reading, and again it went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, nope, can't have Bible readings in school anymore. That is Congress establishing a religion. Another not trick question. Is the school district in Pennsylvania Congress? No. No, it's not, right? And the First Amendment, anybody read it? Says, Congress shall make no law. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion means the Supreme Court needs to strike down a school district's policy on Bible reading? Quite ironically, what they actually did here was exactly what Congress was prohibited from doing. And at least one of the justices on the court understood that very well. Justice Potter Stewart wrote in his dissent here, the refusal to permit religious exercises thus is seen not as the realization of state neutrality, but rather as the establishment of a religion of secularism or humanism. The same doctrine from the pit of hell that there is no God, so you are God, there is no right and wrong, so you can decide what's right and wrong. That was established by the Supreme Court, as pointed out in the dissent. Now, I'm pretty sure when the founders got together and said Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, that didn't mean that the Supreme Court then should go ahead and establish a false religion and order all children to be brainwashed to believe this false religion. And yet that's exactly what happened. And some people were mad, there was bitter clingers who were like, hey, you can't do that. But enough Americans had been brainwashed enough that they were able to get away with it. Just like 10 years later when they claimed that somehow the Constitution, or something they found in the penumbras of the Constitution, meant that states couldn't criminalize murder. Yeah, same place they found this nonsense, huh? So another one of the big things they're doing is called values clarification. And the UN will actually tell you the reason we do values clarification is to make sure children get over their hang-ups about right and wrong. We don't want children to have this dogmatic notion of right and wrong. It might not always be wrong to murder people, right? I mean, sometimes you just have to murder people, okay? Might not always be wrong to steal. There might just be some times when you have to steal stuff, okay? So they've actually become very sophisticated at this. They first introduced this in 1966 in the government schools in America. And they actually did it to me. I was at a elite private high school in Brazil, and they did this to me in 9th grade. I remember it very clearly. It was like this. They told my class, hey guys, you're on a ship and your ship is sinking, and you jump off into the lifeboats, and whoopsies, 11 of you jumped off into the lifeboats, but there was only space for 10, so now you're in trouble. What do? You got a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, an engineer, a teacher. You definitely don't want to kick out the teacher, then you'll get a 0. So who are you going to kick out of your little life raft? Who are you going to murder for the greater good? We've exceeded our carrying capacity, which, by the way, is what they say about the planet. It has exceeded its carrying capacity. So who are you going to murder? So you get together, and all the kids are talking about this and thinking they're so smart. Well, who do we murder? We don't want to do the teacher, because then we're all in big trouble. The doctor might come in handy in case somebody gets sick or something. So everybody agrees finally that the lawyer can go. No. See, the sensible solution here would have actually been, well, hey, why don't we not murder somebody? I'll volunteer to swim alongside the raft for the first hour, and then once I get too tired, we could switch spots, and then you swim, and that'd be a good idea. But no. What happens in the minds of the children is, and they brag about this, in 15 minutes they say they can undo what parents have tried to instill in their children in 15 years using exercises like this. So what happens in the mind of a child? My silly mom and dad said it was wrong to murder. That goofy pastor. I think he said something about a 10 commandment. What kind of goofy God would come up with a law like that? He must have never thought of a situation like this one, where the only ethical thing is for us to murder somebody. So in an instant, they've discredited the parents, they've discredited the pastor, they've discredited the Bible, and now they can write their new moral code on the minds and on the hearts of these children. It's very, very sophisticated. And they're very open about what they're doing now, right? So George H.W. Bush brought in the first effort to nationalize education very openly in this country. And one of the ladies he hired to lead this effort was Dr. Shirley McCoon. This is Dr. Shirley McCoon. And here she is speaking at a conference called by George H.W. New World Order Bush, the same guy who signed Agenda 21, bragging to the governors about what they're doing. Listen.
And fix up these schools and taking care of them, rather than the issue of understanding that what we're into is a total restructuring of the society.
We're totally restructuring society. Right? This isn't about making your kids read, write, and do math. They can't read, write, and do math. The government will tell you that. Less than 1/3 of these victims of government schools are even proficient in reading or writing or doing math, according to the government's own numbers. It's about social change, right? This is what the schools are supposed to be doing, according to these people. Listen.
The other function of schools, which sounds paradoxical and yet in a sense is really not, is the fact that we have to prepare students not for today's society, but for a society that's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so we have to anticipate what the future is, and then move back and figure out what it is we need to do today. That's called anticipatory socialization, or the social change function of school.
The social change function of schools. You'd think they'd need a disclosure, right? If you were a business and you were tricking people about what they were getting and you didn't disclose what you were doing, you'd be prosecuted for fraud. And yet parents think they're sending little Johnny to school to learn how to read, write, and do math, and actually they're there for the social change function of schools. That seems pretty dishonest. Now, where is this lady getting her ideas from, do you suppose? Yes. Pastor wins the prize, right? And she actually admits this. She's got a book on Amazon. I don't encourage you to buy it. You might be able to get it from your local library. It's bat poop crazy. It's called The Light Shall Set You Free. She claims she's speaking to ascended masters who told her that this book is going to transform the world. She's getting the greatest spiritual teachings about the coming new age. We're moving into a new dimension, the 5th dimension. And only people who've been enlightened with this goofy, occult, new age garbage can enter this new age. And so they're very, very effective at what they do now. They've mastered this art of changing values, changing opinions. And there are many examples I could give you. Back in the early 90s, sodomy was still a crime across most of the United States. And they decided they were going to change that. They were going to prepare students for the new order. And so they created a documentary. I've got 30 minutes left? That's awesome. I don't think so, though. If I do, that's great. But I think I might have 15. But if I'll take 30 if you guys will stay. I'll strap you into your seats. All right. So, back in the early 1990s, again, sodomy was still a crime. Supreme Court had not struck down those laws until 2001. But they were preparing children with this social change function of schools in mind. And so here is the little documentary they showed your kids in government schools all across this country. Listen. Oh no, it's one of the videos that's not working because it didn't update properly. Anyways, what it is, it's a guy leading children in a Delphi technique, and he says, all right guys, we're talking about homosexuality today. And there's two camps here. There are the people who agree that homosexuals should be allowed to get married, and then those who don't agree that they should be allowed to get married. And there's some people who don't think it's natural, and then there's other people who think two people who love each other ought to be able to do whatever they want. Okay, and the state shouldn't interfere. Now, if they had told the kids the truth, that marriage is a representation of the relationship between Christ and the church, that a marriage between a man and a woman is the only way to produce a baby, that it was God's order to pass on the faith to the next generation and to produce new image bearers, maybe they wouldn't have come to that conclusion. But he says, all right, kids, we're going to be pretend judges. What do we think about these laws banning loving homosexuals from marrying each other? And then they show all the little kids for the obligatory peer pressure. Oh yeah, that's so mean that we don't let the loving homosexuals get married. And they all agree. And then, within a generation, the pretend judges on our Supreme Court create a so-called right to a homosexual marriage. They light up the White House in rainbow colors, and presto, the social change function of schools at work. Okay? So we're going to talk about SEL now. I've showed you 3 examples so far of actual doctrines of demons in the classroom. I'm going to show you at least one more, depending on how much time we have. So socio-emotional learning is now the main... Okay, very good. Okay, so socio-emotional learning is now the main thing happening in government schools across the country. That's not my opinion. That's what the National Education Association says on their website. And the main organization behind this is funded by Rockefellers and Bill Gates of hell. It's called CASELS, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. And they say right on their website that what they're doing is using SEL competencies to develop justice-oriented global citizens. So they got a neat trick they're doing here, right? When competencies were talked about 20, 30, 40 years ago, they meant like, the child can read a basic text and understand what it means. The child knows his multiplication tables. The new competencies are things like empathy, compassion. And who doesn't want their child to be empathetic or compassionate? That's where they get you. They've got a very different definition of empathy or compassion than you do. See, we think compassion means feeling bad for somebody who's in need. They say compassion means you have to support open borders because you're not compassionate enough for the people on the wrong side of the border. They say compassion means you have to support abortion because you're not compassionate enough for the girl who, for whatever reason, thinks she needs to get rid of her baby. They say compassion means supporting castration of children because otherwise you're not respecting their gender identity and reflecting who they really are. So they have a very different definition. And if you don't meet their definition of compassion, well, we need to stage an intervention. So they're gathering the data on the attitudes of the children. It's fed through the algorithm. And then the algorithm determines, hey, this child has the wrong values or has the wrong attitudes. So that's kind of SEL for you in a nutshell. I've got like a 5-hour presentation on SEL. We won't do it all today. But I want to focus in on one little element. CASEL, as I mentioned, is the main organization promoting this filth. And before I exposed it, they had a nice history tab on their website. This was 2018. I did the first in-depth critical look at SEL. And on their history page, they said this, and I'm quoting, both CASEL, which is the organization we're talking about, and the term social-emotional learning emerged from a meeting in 1994 hosted by the Fetzer Institute. I didn't know what the Fetzer Institute was, so I had to look it up. Turns out, Fetzer was a New Age occultist weirdo disciple of Alice Bailey, the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company, who claimed to be communicating with ascended masters, spiritual entities that were giving him secret insight into what we were doing. And there's a whole book about him. It's really interesting. Now, the leading luminary behind SEL is this lady here up in the little corner. Her name is Linda Lantieri. She's a professor of miseducation at Columbia University Teachers College, the most important teachers college in the world. Listen carefully to what she says in this webinar about where she's getting her ideas.
I'd like to offer some guiding agreements that hopefully we can all agree to in this next hour and a half that we're spending, and they come from one of my teachers who, by the way, showed up at my council table, always does. I hate to say she's passed to another dimension because I have regular communication with her.
She's getting secret insight from her friend who, I hate to say she's passed because I talk to her every night. She comes to my council table. Let's just say she's in another dimension. Okay? Folks, that's crazy talk, right? And she's not talking to dead people. contrary to what she thinks, she's talking to demons, is what the Bible teaches very clearly. Now, here's a little video from the Fetzer Institute about some of this. Listen up. Here's Linda Lantieri.
Courses like this are rooted in social and emotional learning, or SEL for short, a style of teaching that was pioneered by Linda Lantieri.
I did not imagine that I would be living to see some SEL in 92% of the nation's schools.
Oh, it's a lot more than 92% now, right? If you follow this issue closely, you'll know that even a lot of Christian schools have now started introducing Christian SEL. They sprinkled a couple Bible verses on top and said, oh, it's a Christian SEL. No, it's not. Okay? It's all coming from the same place, and it's all garbage. But let's continue here.
That if we didn't add the spiritual dimension to this work, we were going to leave kids with not all they needed to know. And the Fetzer Institute is really poised right now to step up in supporting this movement.
Fetzer understands that a basic science to establish the natural spirituality of the child presented a blueprint for building a new system of education. The people of Fetzer walk the walk.
The natural spirituality of the child. What is the natural spirituality of the child according to the Bible? The heart is desperately wicked, right? We are inclined to do all kinds of evil left to our own devices. And so the UN has actually now set up an agency that's dedicated to pushing this all over the world. It's headquartered in India, a pagan nation, and that is not a coincidence. I was there a couple months ago. They don't like to talk to me for obvious reasons. But the agency is called the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development, or UNESCO NGIP for short. And they tell you that they're transforming education. They say they're using neuroscience and spirituality to bring about a whole new system of education. And the three amigos who set up this agency, you can see them right here. You've got Irina Bokova, a card-carrying member of the Bulgarian Communist Party. She served as foreign minister for a regime that slaughtered 250,000 people out of a population of 10 million. So that'll give you some sense of where she's at. Literally, communist mass murderer. Here you got Rosa Utanbayeva. She was the leader of the Soviet Kyrgyz Republic and also the president of the Soviet National Commission of UNESCO, another communist mass murderer. And then we've got this guy here, Dr. Karan Singh, the co-chair of the World Commission on Global Consciousness and Spirituality, and also the Minister of Family Planning in India while they were rounding up millions of poor Indians and strapping them to tables and chopping out their reproductive organs to sterilize them. Nice people set up this nice organization, isn't it? Now, they'll tell you what they're doing. Okay, here's UNESCO NGIP bragging about what they're doing with SEL. Listen.
I come from UNESCO MGIP that is based in New Delhi, and we'll be talking to you today about socio-emotional learning and how we feel that this is the key to building global citizenship. My name is Nandini Chatterjee Singh, and I'm a neuroscientist by training.
It's the key to building global citizenship, is what she said, okay? So we're going to skip through a lot of this because we're almost out of time. But I want to fast forward now to what the UN is doing at the international level, right? And there's so many doctrines of demons in the classroom, we just don't have time to go through them all. But one of the things they're doing is they're brainwashing your kids to be global citizens for a global government, a global economy, and a global religious order. And they say it, right? Their global action plan ratified in 2016 says education needs to change values and it needs to include the spirituality of children. And they're very openly doing this, even here in the United States.
Hi, I'm Arnie Duncan, U.S. Secretary of Education. And we are so honored that the UN Secretary General has designated the United States as a champion country of the UN Global Education First Initiative.
So we're not just part of this. We are a champion country of the UN's effort to globalize all education. Okay? Now, the UN has what they call the World Core Curriculum. The guy who wrote it, Robert Mueller, he was the other co-chair of that World Commission on Global Consciousness and Spirituality. He claimed that the United Nations was the body of Christ, which is, of course, blasphemous beyond anything you can imagine, right? The church is the body of Christ, not the collection of gangsters, mass murderers, and kleptocrats calling themselves nations. But he wrote this World Core Curriculum. He said it needed to be taught to every child, in every school, in every country. And he admitted in the foreword to the teacher's manual that the underlying philosophy upon which it's all based comes out of the teachings in the books of Alice Bailey by the Tibetan teacher Djwhal Khul. And most people don't know what that means. Alice Bailey was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. And Lucifer Publishing was just a little bit too obvious, so they've now renamed it Lucius Trust. But it's the same diabolical thing. Okay? And that Tibetan teacher is not a Tibetan or a teacher or a human being. Alice Bailey claimed to be communicating with spiritual entities she called ascended masters, who were giving her secret insight into the coming new age. And so the guy who wrote the World Core curriculum that should be taught to every child in every school in every country says it's all based on the teachings of a lady who claimed to be talking to spirits who founded the Lucifer Publishing Company. Now, in her defense, she thought Lucifer was the good guy. Lucifer came to bring us knowledge and light and wisdom and liberate us from that oppressive deity, Adonai, Jehovah, Yahweh, that we know from the scriptures. And so they think Lucifer was the good guy in their defense, right? They think our God was the bad guy. But in this book, she wrote on education in the New Age, which again is the fundamental underlying foundation of the World Core curriculum. She says we're laying the foundation for the emergence of a new species of human being, a more highly evolved unit. Okay, and there's so much crazy stuff in here. But she says world citizenship should be the goal of the enlightened, with a world federation and a world brain. Right, this was many decades before Google came along and started trying to create a world brain and hook us all up to it through Elon Musk's crazy Neuralink. So the problem is we've got to synthesize Marxism and Neo-Scholasticism, and we're going to do it using the chosen methods of John Dewey, who we met earlier. So I've given you now 5 examples of doctrines of demons coming from actually the people who are creating and running the system that is educating the vast majority of children in the world. They're bragging about what they're doing. Here's the Secretary General of the UN in 2015.
Education must do more than produce individuals who can read, write, and count. It must nurture global citizens.
Global citizens, see, for the global government and the global religious system. Now, Bill Gates of hell went over to UNESCO headquarters, signed a deal with them in 2004 to create global curricula and global standards. Then he came back and started pushing Common Core on our country. And they brag in their own advertisements that Common Core is aligned with the international standards that the UN is pushing. So it all comes full circle. So what do? Well, for one, we got to sound the alarm, folks. This is wickedness. It's evil. We must protect children from this diabolical indoctrination. The school building is on fire. Don't go harangue your school board member. Rescue your children and sound the alarm for others. Pastors need to be sounding the alarm about this. And we need to go back and rethink about why we even do education. What is the purpose of education? Who should be in charge of it? Well, the Bible has a lot to say on this. Ephesians 6:4, which is actually my children's favorite Bible verse, because it says, fathers, don't provoke your children to anger. But it also says, fathers, bring up your children in the discipline and instruction, the fear, the admonition, the nurture of the Lord, right? That's what education looks like. God tells us that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. There's no fear of the Lord taught in any of the government schools today, and that's a fact. So how much wisdom or knowledge are they getting? Math is not my forte, but the answer is, of course, 0. Okay? So, again, we come back to Jesus' words, whoever is not with me is against me. Is this system with Christ? No. It's not, right? So when we talk about the purpose of education, I love what Classical Conversation says. They say the purpose of education is to know God and make Him known. I agree 100%. I add a little bit to that. Purpose of education is to teach people to know, serve, fear, and obey God, as well as how to think while forming a godly character and developing skills to serve and work with others. So I've got a couple books on this. If anybody wants one, let me know. Free newsletter, libertysentinel.org/subscribe. Would highly recommend that you get a subscription to the New American Magazine. And I'll just leave you with this, folks. This is not a political or even an educational battle. It's a spiritual battle, is what the Bible teaches us. As the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians 6:12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. And then he tells us how to deal with it, right? You take the shield of faith, that's going to quench the fiery darts of the wicked. You take the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. That's going to be your offensive weapon in this battle. And we're out of time, so we'll leave it there. Thank you, guys, and God bless you.